There are times in life when the road seems long, the burdens feel heavy, and the answers are nowhere to be found. You've prayed, you've waited, and yet nothing seems to change. But let me tell you, just because you don't see it yet doesn't mean that God isn't working. The very struggles you face today may be the signs that He is preparing you for something greater. Think about the story of Joseph. He was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused and left forgotten in prison. But did God abandon him? No. Every setback was a setup for something greater. When Joseph was in the pit, God saw the palace. When he was in prison, God was preparing the promotion. What looked like suffering was actually preparation for the blessing that was coming. Sometimes before the blessing arrives, God has to test your faith. He wants to see if you'll trust Him even when the doors seem closed. Will you remain faithful when the promotion doesn't come? Will you keep believing when the healing hasn't happened yet? God doesn't just want to bless you, He wants to prepare you so you can handle the blessing when it comes. And maybe you're in a season of waiting. Maybe everything around you is saying it's not going to happen. But delay is not denial. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not on the way. God works in His own time, and His timing is perfect. The longer the wait, the greater the blessing. If He gave it to you too soon, you might not be ready for it. Some of you are facing battles that feel overwhelming. You're wondering why God has allowed the storm, why He hasn't calmed the waters yet. But hear me today. The storm is proof that the blessing is near. The enemy doesn't attack where there's no threat. The resistance you're feeling is confirmation that you're getting closer to the breakthrough God has in store for you. And let me tell you something else. God often removes things before He blesses. He may take away a job, a relationship, or a comfort you once depended on. But don't grieve what He has taken, because what He is about to give is far greater. Sometimes He has to strip away the lesser so He can make room for the greater. So hold on. Don't give up. Keep praying, keep trusting, keep believing. Your struggles are not in vain. They are the proof that God is preparing you for something beyond what you can imagine. When the time is right, the door will open, the breakthrough will come, and the blessing will overflow. Stay faithful, because He who promised is faithful. Struggles are preparation. The challenges you face are often signs that God is preparing you for something greater. Faith is tested before blessings. God tests your faith in difficult seasons to see if you will remain faithful before He releases the blessing. Waiting is not denial. Delays in receiving your blessing do not mean rejection. God's timing is always perfect. Resistance means you're close. Spiritual battles and opposition are often signs that your breakthrough is near. God removes to make room. Sometimes God takes away people, jobs, or situations to prepare you for something better. Stay faithful until the blessing arrives. No matter how long it takes, trust that God's promise will come to pass at the right time. There are moments in life when we wonder why we are facing so many difficulties. The road becomes rough, prayers seem unanswered, and nothing makes sense. But what if I told you that the very struggles you are facing are not a sign of abandonment, but preparation for something greater? Look at the life of Joseph. As a young man, he had dreams of greatness, but instead of stepping right into his blessing, he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused and left in prison. From the outside, it looked like his life was falling apart. But in reality, God was shaping him for the destiny he had planned. Every hardship Joseph endured was training ground for the palace. If he had gone straight from his father's house to Pharaoh's throne, he wouldn't have been ready. He had to go through the pit to develop patience. He had to go through slavery to learn humility. He had to go through the prison to be refined in character. Each challenge was a step toward his calling. Sometimes the struggle is not about breaking you, but about making you. The hardship you're facing might be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. A tree that is deeply rooted can withstand the storm. But those roots don't grow deep overnight. They grow through pressure, through resistance, through time. Likewise, God allows seasons of difficulty to strengthen you so that when the blessing comes, you won't be shaken by it. There are lessons you can only learn in the valley. There are strengths you will only develop in the fire. Gold is refined by heat. Diamonds are formed under pressure. And strong warriors are made in battle. If God is allowing you to go through something difficult, it is because he is preparing you for something bigger than you can see. He doesn't waste pain. He doesn't allow suffering without a purpose. What feels like a setback is actually a setup for something greater. Think about David. He was anointed as king at a young age, yet he spent years tending sheep and fighting battles in the wilderness before he ever sat on the throne. Why? Because God was preparing him. The lion and the bear he faced in the field were training for the giant he would one day defeat. If he hadn't gone through those struggles, he wouldn't have had the confidence or the strength to take down Goliath. When God is preparing you for a major blessing, he doesn't take shortcuts. He allows you to go through seasons of waiting, refining, and testing, so that when the blessing arrives, you are ready to carry it. If the doors haven't opened yet, it's not because he has forgotten you. It's because he is still working, still shaping, still building you up for the moment he releases his promise into your life. The struggles are not punishment. They are preparation. Before God brings a great blessing into your life, he often tests your faith. It is easy to trust him when everything is going well, when prayers are answered quickly, and when doors open without struggle. But the true test of faith comes when things don't go as expected, when delays stretch on, and when challenges seem overwhelming. God wants to know if you will still trust him when the promise isn't yet visible. Abraham was given a promise that he would be the father of many nations, yet years passed without a child. He and Sarah grew old, and still the promise had not come to pass. But God was watching to see if Abraham would hold on to faith, even when the situation seemed impossible. And because he did, the promise was fulfilled in the perfect time. The blessing came not in Abraham's strength, but in God's power. Had Abraham received the blessing immediately, he might not have understood the depth of God's faithfulness. The waiting season strengthened his trust in God, and the blessing was even greater because of it. Faith is not proven in times of comfort, but in times of testing. Consider the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. God had already promised them the land flowing with milk and honey. But before they could enter, he led them through a time of testing. They faced hunger, thirst, and battles. Every difficulty was an opportunity for them to trust him more. Yet many failed the test, complaining and doubting instead of believing. Because of their lack of faith, they delayed their own blessing. God was ready to bring them into the promised land, but they were not ready to receive it. Sometimes the delay in your breakthrough is not because God is unwilling, but because he is testing whether you are truly prepared to handle it. If he gave it too soon, it might become a burden instead of a blessing. A child may desire to drive a car, but a wise parent waits until they are mature enough to handle the responsibility. God in his wisdom does the same. The test of faith is meant to strengthen you so that when the blessing comes, you will have the character, wisdom, and endurance to sustain it. Look at Job, a man who was tested in ways most of us could hardly imagine. He lost everything, his family, his wealth, his health, yet he refused to turn away from God. Even in his suffering, he declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And because he held on to his faith through the darkest valley, God restored him with even greater blessings than before. If you are facing a test of faith right now, do not lose heart. The test is not to harm you, but to prepare you. God is watching to see if you will trust him, even when you don't understand. He is strengthening you, refining your character, and getting you ready for the blessing he has already planned. Waiting is one of the hardest things to do, especially when you believe that God has promised you something. You pray, you hope, you believe, but nothing seems to be happening. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and sometimes even years. The longer you wait, the more the enemy tries to whisper doubts into your mind. Maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe God has forgotten about you. But that is not true. Just because you do not see the blessing yet does not mean that it is not on the way. God's delays are not denials. His timing is perfect, and he knows exactly when to release what he has prepared for you. Think about Noah. God told him to build an ark because a great flood was coming. Noah obeyed, but the flood did not come right away. For years he built the ark while others mocked him. Can you imagine how long that waiting must have felt? Yet Noah continued to trust God even though he didn't see any evidence of rain. And when the time was right, the flood came, and Noah was saved because he had been faithful in the waiting. Then there is Hannah, a woman who longed for a child. She cried out to God year after year, watching others around her receive their blessings while she remained barren. But she did not stop praying. She did not stop believing. And when the time was right, God gave her a son, Samuel, who became one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history. If Hannah had received her blessing too soon, it might not have fulfilled the purpose God intended. But because she waited on the Lord, her child was born at the perfect time to be used for God's glory. Waiting is not just about time passing. It is about what God is doing in you during that time. He is strengthening your faith, refining your character, and preparing you for the blessing he has planned. Sometimes the blessing itself is ready, but you are not. If he gave it to you too soon, you might not have the wisdom, the strength, or the spiritual maturity to handle it properly. So in his mercy, he makes you wait, not to punish you, but to protect you. Joseph waited years for his dream to come to pass. He went through betrayal, slavery, and prison before he finally saw the fulfillment of what God had shown him. If Joseph had gone straight to the palace without the process, he might not have been able to sustain the position God had for him. The waiting prepared him to lead with wisdom and humility. God's promises are sure, and when the time is right, nothing can stop them from coming to pass. Until then, trust him. If you are in a season of waiting, do not see it as a delay, but as preparation. What God has for you is greater than anything you could imagine, and when it comes, you will see that the wait was worth it. When you are close to receiving a blessing from God, the enemy will try to do everything in his power to stop you. He knows that when God opens a door, no one can shut it. So he tries to discourage you before you reach it. The closer you get to the breakthrough, the more resistance you may face. You may feel like everything is going wrong, like the attacks are stronger than ever, and like the opposition is relentless. But that is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that you are on the verge of something great. Look at Jesus before he started his ministry. The moment he was baptized and God declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," he was led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. The enemy knew that Jesus was about to walk into his calling, so he tried to weaken him before it even began. He tempted him with food, power, and pride, trying to get him to doubt his identity and his purpose. But Jesus stood firm, resisted the enemy, and walked into his ministry with power. The same happens to believers today. Right before a breakthrough, the enemy will try to plant seeds of doubt, fear, and frustration. He wants you to give up before you reach the promise. He will use people to discourage you, circumstances to shake your faith, and unexpected obstacles to make you question if God is really with you. But the resistance is proof that something is coming. The enemy does not waste his attacks on those who are going nowhere. The greater the calling, the greater the opposition. David was anointed as king at a young age, but before he took the throne, he faced some of his greatest battles. He had to defeat Goliath, run for his life from King Saul, and endure years of hardship before he stepped into his position. The enemy tried to stop him at every turn because he knew that David was chosen for something great. But David did not let the resistance break him. He let it strengthen him. Every battle prepared him for the throne. Every hardship taught him how to trust God more. Sometimes when you are facing resistance, it is not because you are doing something wrong. It is because you are doing something right. The enemy is afraid of what God is about to do in your life. He sees the potential, the calling, the anointing, and he wants to stop it before it manifests. But he cannot stop what God has ordained. No matter what comes against you, if you stay faithful, you will see the blessing. When the battle gets intense, when you feel like giving up, when it seems like things are getting worse instead of better, that is often the moment right before the breakthrough. The enemy fights the hardest when he knows he is about to lose. Hold on, because what God has promised is about to come to pass. There are times in life when things are taken away, and it feels like loss, disappointment, or even failure. A job ends, a relationship falls apart, an opportunity slips through your fingers. In those moments, it is easy to feel discouraged, to wonder why God allowed it to happen. But what if the removal was not a setback, but a setup for something greater? What if God is making room for a bigger blessing that you cannot yet see? Abraham was called by God to leave his home, his family, and everything familiar to him. God did not tell him exactly where he was going, only that he had something greater prepared. Abraham could have refused to let go of his past, but had he stayed, he would have never walked into the promise God had for him. Sometimes the blessing is waiting, but you have to release what is holding you back in order to receive it. When God removes something from your life, it is never without purpose. He sees the full picture when you can only see a small part. What looks like rejection may actually be protection. What seems like loss may actually be preparation. Sometimes we hold on to things that are not meant for us, relationships that are unhealthy, jobs that are beneath our calling. situations that are comfortable but not what God intends. And when we do not let go on our own, God steps in and removes them, not to hurt us, but to make room for what He has in store. Think about Joseph. He was sold into slavery, falsely accused and thrown into prison. It seemed like everything was taken from him, his family, his freedom, his reputation. But if Joseph had remained in his comfortable life with his father, he never would have stepped into the position God had for him. He never would have become second in command over Egypt, saving countless lives, including his own family. What looked like a painful loss was actually the pathway to his destiny. Sometimes we ask God to bless us, but we do not realize that blessings require space. If your hands are full of the wrong things, how can you receive the right things? If your heart is clinging to the past, how can you embrace the future? God removes what is not meant for you so that you are ready for what is. Look at Job. He lost everything, his wealth, his health, even his children. Yet through it all, he remained faithful, and in the end, God restored him with twice as much as he had before. If Job had given up in his pain, he would have never seen the greater blessing that was waiting. If God is removing something from your life, trust that He knows what He is doing. It may not make sense now, and it may be painful, but one day you will see that what He took away was nothing compared to what He is about to give. Keep your heart open, your faith strong, and your hands ready to receive what is coming. Faithfulness is one of the most important qualities God looks for in His people. It is easy to stay committed when everything is going well, but true faithfulness is proven in seasons of waiting, uncertainty, and difficulty. When God gives you a promise, there will always be a period of preparation before it is fulfilled. How you handle that waiting season determines whether or not you are ready for the blessing when it comes. Look at Noah. God told him to build an ark because a flood was coming. There were no clouds in the sky, no sign of rain, yet Noah obeyed. Year after year, he kept building while people mocked him. He didn't see immediate results, but he remained faithful to what God had commanded. And when the rain finally came, Noah and his family were saved because he had not given up. If he had abandoned the work halfway, he would have missed God's provision. Abraham was given a promise that he would be the father of many nations. Yet for years, he and Sarah remained childless. It would have been easy for him to doubt, to stop believing, to walk away from God's promise. But despite the delay, he continued to trust. He made mistakes along the way, but he never stopped believing that God would fulfill what he had spoken. And because he remained faithful, he eventually saw the birth of Isaac, the child of promise. Faithfulness is not just about believing. It is about continuing to walk in obedience even when you don't see results. David was anointed as king at a young age, but he spent years in the wilderness running from King Saul. He could have taken matters into his own hands, but instead he waited for God's timing. He remained faithful in the small things, serving, fighting battles, and trusting God to bring the promise to pass at the right time. When the day finally came, he was ready to step into the role God had prepared for him. The enemy will always try to discourage you in the waiting season. He will tell you that God has forgotten you, that nothing is going to change, that it is better to give up. But those are lies. If God has spoken a promise over your life, it will come to pass. The question is whether you will remain faithful until it does. Joseph had dreams of greatness, but before they came true, he faced betrayal, slavery, and prison. He could have become bitter, but instead he stayed faithful wherever he was placed. Even in prison, he continued to serve, continued to trust, continued to believe. And when the time was right, God elevated him to a position of power. If you are waiting for a breakthrough, do not grow weary. Keep praying, keep believing, keep doing what God has called you to do. Your faithfulness in this season is the key to stepping into the blessing that is coming. God is not slow in keeping his promises. He is preparing you to receive them. God's ways are higher than our ways, and his timing is always perfect. Even when things seem unclear, even when the road feels long and difficult, he is working behind the scenes, preparing something greater than we can imagine. Every trial, every delay, every closed door is not meant to break you, but to build you. The struggles you face are not signs of abandonment, but evidence that God is shaping you for the blessing ahead. Look at the way he has worked in the lives of those who came before us. Joseph, David, Abraham, and Job all had moments when they could have given up, but they held on. They trusted that even when they couldn't see it, God was moving. And in the end, they walked into their blessings at exactly the right moment. If God was faithful to them, he will be faithful to you. When life doesn't make sense, when prayers seem unanswered, when the wait feels too long, that is the moment to press in deeper. God is not ignoring you. He is preparing you. He is making sure that when the blessing arrives, you will be able to carry it well. A house needs a strong foundation before it can stand, and in the same way, your faith must be strengthened before you step into greater things. The enemy will try to shake you. He will try to make you doubt, to make you believe that nothing is changing, that your prayers are in vain. But those are lies. The enemy doesn't attack those who are standing still. He fights those who are moving towards something great. If you are facing opposition, it means you are close. If you are experiencing resistance, it means you are on the right path. Don't let temporary trials cause you to forfeit eternal promises. Trust the process. Even when things are removed from your life, even when people walk away, even when doors close, know that God is making room for something better. If he allowed something to end, it is because he has something greater ahead. Don't hold on to what he is trying to take away. Don't cling to what was when he is calling you to what will be. Stay faithful. Keep walking in obedience. Keep praying when you don't see results. Keep worshiping when the answer hasn't come. Keep believing when the promise seems far away. Every moment of faithfulness is building something greater than you can see. Your faith is being strengthened, your character is being refined, and your heart is being prepared. When the time is right, the door will open, and you will step into everything God has promised. And when that moment comes, you will look back and see that every tear, every struggle, every delay was worth it. You will see that God never forgot you, never abandoned you, and never failed to keep his word. You will see that the blessing was always on its way. It was just waiting for you to be ready.